was at this time that President Woodrow Wilson called in the U.S. Army and the violence was quelled. The strike was broken and the mines were returned to the owners. For the next... So in the interest of maintaining the spirit of May Day, and along the lines of our earlier podcast about the West Virginia Cold Wars, I wanted to do a little segment on the Ludlow Massacre. So the Ludlow Massacre, immortalized in song by Woody Guthrie. It's an incredible bit of labor history in the U.S. that unfortunately, as Howard Zinn will mention, too few people know about. So this actually happened. This was the same time period, roughly. I believe this was maybe a decade before the Cold Wars, the Appalachian Cold Wars. This is in Colorado, though.
Okay.
So if you just want to go ahead and play the first clip.
It was early springtime and the strike was on. It drove us miles.
And this is Howard Zinn doing the commentary here.
Out from the houses that the company owned.
This is a Woody Guthrie song. Zinn talks about it.
I was interested because I'd been a shipyard worker from the age of 18 to the age of 21 and had joined a union. And one day I heard a song by Woody Guthrie called the Ludlow Massacre, a dark, haunting, powerful song. And that led me to look in a library about this event, which nobody had ever mentioned in any of my history courses, which no textbook of mine had ever mentioned.
Yeah, it's been erased from history, just like the rest of the labor movement.
Stop me. 13 children died from your guns. We told the Colorado governor to phone the president. Tell him call off his National Guard.
What did that say?
Oh, we'll get into that. Yeah.
Okay.
That was kind of the culmination of what happened at Ludlow and why it's so important.
Belonged to the governor, so he didn't try.
Yeah, these are all photos from that time. I believe this one was set up from the actual day when everything occurred. Machine gun nest.
The strike was lost. The miners had to go back to work, but the event had a tremendous effect, I think, on lots of people around the country. Anybody who read about the Ludlow Massacre, anybody who heard about it, was bound to be affected by it.
I said, God bless the Mine Workers Union.
This stuff makes me so upset, dude, when I read about it.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's horrible.
It's upsetting on upsetting on two levels. Like on the first level, these guys died. They were massacred. Like, for example, the Cold Wars we talked about last time, the striking workers, the ones that weren't murdered, were thrown in prison afterward. And the second thing that bothers me is the fact that it's been completely erased from history.
I think that's the part that gets to me most. We have all these different, obviously we have like the foundational myths and these characters that we prop up from the creation of our country, or the founding of our country, Jefferson and Madison and Washington and all those. And you can kind of see, just because of their importance to our nation, why they have a place, why we talk about them. But then there's other people like the Alamo, and you got Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and what was his name? Something Buck, the guy that made the buck knife. And we mythologize those guys, and they're taught about, and we learn who these characters are. And that was just like some kind of silly national pride event. It didn't really have any significance. It's certainly not anything that we should be really proud of. But guys like these that in events like these that we should know the names of and we should be incredibly proud of, they just get put by the wayside. And it's so horrible. And
well, I think that's intentional. I think that's intentionally done.
I'm sure it is. I know it is. I know it is. So yeah, like Appalachia, there were parts of just a little history kind of to set all this up. Like in Appalachia, there was parts of Colorado that had bountiful veins of coal very near the surface, making them incredibly profitable. Mining companies began sprouting up in the mid to late 1800s in the areas between the gold mining claims. As was the case all over the country, labor regulations initially were non-existent, and the nature of the work in the coal mines was particularly dangerous. Combine this with an abundance of poor and immigrant families looking for work, and you have prime conditions for exploitation. mules were famously valued higher than workers as they were much more difficult to replace.
So they were kind of promised this way of life that was nothing but layered with gold. And so they came out to work these mines. They were looked at no more than, just somebody to produce profit for the companies.
Forced overtime, when they left their homes, women that were left at home would often be exploited. These were ruthless conditions. These were ignorant immigrants for the company and for the company men and for the people who patrolled the coal camps where people were living.
There were so many ways to die in a coal mine. There were explosions, gas buildup. Coal secretes, as part of its decaying process, methane gas, an explosive in a mine. Miners produced clouds of coal dust, which not only settled in their lungs, slowly suffocating them, but also created an accelerant that would ignite the methane gas. In 1910 alone, more than 400 miners died in Colorado, 210 of them in 3 separate explosions. The vast majority of miners died in ones or twos, in rock falls and in small accidents.
It looked like a company paper where they were like listing the accidents that had happened, and it's like 35 guys died in this one because of dust. 22 died in this one because of dust. 54 died in this one. It was just, the numbers were absolutely insane.
It's coming up. I wonder if this is, it's not zoomed out enough to see if this is like a day or a week or anyway.
Yeah, I guess. Well, it would be cool if it was over the course of like a year. You're right. James, Jesus.
Well, it doesn't make sense for that to be the case because it says number killed, 19 from dust. And then the line below, like for example here, it says 1. Dust, and then right below that there's another line that says 75 dust. So maybe this is like week to week, or God forbid day to day. That would be horrific.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I guess if those are maybe explosions or asphyxiation from dust, explosions from dust, asphyxiation from dust. I'm sure they weren't keeping track of the people that died from black lung or lung diseases.
They didn't live that long to get black lung.
Yeah.
Fucking worked them to death, dude, like animals. And they had no choice. They were not
worse than animals.
They had no choice.
Worse than animals. They treated the mules better than them. The mules weren't coming there begging for a job. All the immigrants and poor people and they were. So, in addition to the horrifically dangerous conditions in these mines, miners were only paid by the amount of coal they removed from the mines and were constantly docked by the companies for every conceivable reason they could. If a miner had a few rocks in their coal cart, then the company would claim the entire cart was unusable, not pay the miner for it, but dump it in with the coal that was to be sold anyway. Miners were also required to do all the blasting and construction in the mines. The mines needed to be dug, explosives laid, debris cleared out, mine walls and ceilings shored up. All of this work, while necessary, was not work for which the miner would be paid, since they weren't removing clean coal. It was possible for a miner to work an entire week and not get paid.
We have very little here that actually documents the event at Ludlow. What we have is materials that predate the event, which document things like the conditions in the coal mines, the workers' conditions, accident reports, the types of accidents the miners were having, things like explosions in the mines, possible deaths, those sorts of things. The miners definitely were working under some pretty harsh conditions, and Ludlow was a direct result of the miners not being satisfied with their working conditions.
Yeah. So at the time, though, workers lived in company towns, read company-approved books, watched movies at the company theater with the company-approved films. They bought groceries with company script and often lived behind barbed wire. This was all done to discourage organizing and labor-related ideas from infecting their human workforce. However, in spite of company efforts to quell labor unrest, the conditions these workers lived under were so poor that the miners began to organize regardless. Famous figures like Mother Jones, who was active in the Virginia coal mine organizing efforts, helped to push the disaffected miners and began building communities between the mining towns of the area. Over the winter of 1913 and 1914, there were numerous acts of violence in the area by striking miners against the coal companies and by coal company hired thugs against striking miners. With the strikes not slowing down, the companies evicted miners from all over the area that were causing issues. The UMWA, that's the United Mine Workers Association, set up tent towns for homeless families. Incidentally, these communities were models, I would say, of libertarian socialism in action. Leaders were elected from amongst the people, but the entire electorate had a say in the organization and management of these towns. From town layout to small governmental actions, things were ran democratically. Social services were set up, schools and hospitals were run, all the while organizing and planning strikes and recruitment drives among the local mines. Great pride was taken in the effective management of these towns. The coal companies tried to portray these workers as criminals, rabble, and ne'er-do-wells that were only causing trouble. The miners made it a point to showcase their intelligence and humanity.
Let me get this straight. So the mine workers, they did all the work, right? They dug the mine, they did the walls, you said. They mined all the ore, the coal. They brought the coal, they drug the coal up, or the mules helped them, I guess, maybe? Or maybe they did it?
One of the things they also had to do, they had to lay the tracks they had the coal carts, and I think you get like a ton of toll per cart. Yeah, I guess either you or the mules would help to pull the carts out as the carts were filled during the day.
So they did all the work, basically, but they barely got paid shit. They just got paid enough to survive under very poor conditions, and they were breathing coal dust all day.
Yeah, I mean, and, technically, like, they weren't even paid. They weren't getting any cash. They were given a place to live and enough food to barely scrape by. This is all company script, company towns. You can live there while you're being worked to death, but if you decide to leave, you're going to leave with absolutely nothing because you didn't gain anything while you were there. And incidentally, so these mines in particular, I didn't mention this, but these were owned by the Rockefeller family, the very famous John D. Rockefeller, super wealthy. So my understanding is the Rockefellers were doing pretty well.
Well, who'd they buy them
off
from?
Of these mines,
Who'd the Rockefellers buy the mines from?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I get what you're getting at, but I don't know. I guess maybe the government.
Probably the government.
Yeah. I mean, in the early 1800s? I mean, well, this has happened in 1913, but originally the mines were opened in the mid 1800s, 1859, 1879. The area was probably just being settled by white people at that point.
It must have been
just kind of become.
It must have been pretty hard to convince all these mine workers that the Rockefellers somehow had a right to own these mines, like literally a hole in the earth. You're telling me that John D. Rockefeller had some moral right to own a hole in the earth, pay the government some of his ill-gotten gains for it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was Rockefeller, the first Rockefeller's son that was the one that owned them. So yeah, he had the right because his dad made a lot of money. That's how things work, James. Jesus.
It's when you're that close to sort of the inception of all of this property rights nonsense, it must be a very different scenario. And the fact that the federal government and the state governments were helping put down these strikers. It's almost like an Indian-style caste system, the way they looked at society, I think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's, and it's the same shit going on today. I mean, this is the same, Joe Manchin. Yeah. I mean, this is the same thing. You have enough money, you set up these corrupt deals with government so that your business can flourish, and you just exploit and poison all the normal people in the area.
Yeah. Joe Manchin, to this day, runs his Maserati right over mine workers. And they still vote for him. They don't care.
Yeah. and there were plenty of mine workers at the time that were, that were standing up for the company. And, it's
if only
it's
Mao,
their land, it's their company.
If only Chairman Mao had started writing his book earlier, if he had been born 100 years earlier, things would have went very differently in the colonial United States.
At the beginning of the strike, the governor of Colorado, Elias Ammon, called in the National Guard. But over time, the National Guardsmen were rotated out, and they were replaced by new recruits who also worked as mine guards for the companies. So by the spring of 1914, many of the National Guardsmen were receiving two paychecks, one from the state of Colorado and one from the mines to protect the miners' interests.
In this labor dispute, to do what? To defend everybody? To defend the Coloradans? No, to protect the mine interests.
This is what the CIA still does. They would give $10,000. What the hell did I do? They would give $10,000 to some warlord in Afghanistan to basically be a turncoat and work for the Americans. And he may or may not stab him in the back, but he got his money. We still do the same shit. It still goes on.
Yeah, this goes back as old as time. I mean, you can read, stories about, Rome conquering Gaul or Hispania or, the Germanic tribes. And it was the exact same stuff. They were paying people to turn against their own. And, it
a lot
works.
Of people do it.
It's effective.
When you have a family to think about.
And, I didn't really like that guy too much anyway, so I'm just going to take this other guy's money. But yeah, so The state government sends out the National Guard. They're trying to, all the miners have congregated in this one particular tent town. They are trying to organize the mines. The mine owners call the governor. He sends out National Guard. They start fighting, hostilities. It's kind of like a low simmer at this point. This was over the winter, I guess, coming out of the winter of 1913 into early 1914. So in April, the miners of the town celebrated Greek Easter. Many of the miners were of Greek descent, and the most prominent labor organizer of the time, labor organizer and leader, was a man named Louis Tikas. He was of Greek descent. So the miners celebrated feasting, dancing, even a baseball game. You know, this is like kind of like pure Americana, what they're doing. The following morning, April 20th, 1914, Louis Tikas went to meet with the National Guard because of the palpable rising tensions, and there was rumors floating around at the festivities the previous day about potential hostilities coming up very soon. He'd hoped to negotiate a truce and avoid any possible bloodshed. Tikas had his head beaten with a rifle stock until the stock broke, and then an officer pulled out a revolver and shot him in the back, killing him. While the ill-fated meeting was going on, 2 militias moved out and set up a machine gun position on a hill overlooking the town and moved troops out for the attack. Large explosions of dynamite from the machine gun crews rang out, signaling the attack to National Guard members. Machine guns and rifle fire opened up on the town. The men grabbed their guns to take up positions while their families ran for cover wherever they could find it.
This is crazy, dude.
It was, you know, there's complete mask off at this point. They were set an intent on wiping that town out, on getting rid of any sort of organizing movement. Because these guys, there was a lot of mines in the area, and they're constantly sending out delegates to try to speak with the mines and get the people that were still working there to start organizing for the good of everybody. For the good of everybody that lived in that area, except for a handful of people, many of which, like I said, like Rockefeller was not living in Colorado at that time, except for those handful of rich people who still would have been ridiculously rich. Everyone would have benefited, and that's what these miners are working at.
Well, that's the most egregious thing about this, and the reason it's not taught in school, because this was before there was a right to form a union. There was no right. So the Rockefeller just talks to the governor and says, "Hey, let's get the National Guard down here to kill these people." It's absolutely insane. This is just state-sponsored. Yeah. It's literally state-sponsored terrorism against their own people to make them go back to work. It's utterly insane, and nobody knows about this. People would look very differently at the labor movement if they knew this history, man.
Yeah. It might have been Chomsky. I don't know if it was him or not. Anyways, he once said that. I guess he was speaking about the U.S. He said, "Government is." Just the enforcement arm of the business community in the U.S., or it often acts that way. And this is,
of course, yeah,
that to a T. I mean, the government is existing in Colorado to do what the mine owners want them to do, to keep the peace, to build the infrastructure where they need it built, to run out the rabble that they need ran out. Who gives a shit about the people they're actually paying the taxes? Let's take care of what the mine owners. And what are the mine? Let's say they stop doing it. Are the mine owners just going to move elsewhere? No, the coal's there. You know, put some regulations on them. Let's let these guys. And actually, at this point, they had introduced a bunch of since the mid 1800s. They had introduced a lot of mine safety regulations at this point. But and a lot of the reason for the organizing was these mine companies just ignored it. They just weren't following it. They just didn't give a shit.
I hate this. I hate watching this. This makes me so mad.
Yeah, I know it.
Detectives hired by the mine companies would in turn terrorize the miners. Private detectives from the Baldwin Felts Detective Company manufactured this armored car with a machine gun mounted on the back that they called the Death Special. And they would tear through these tent cities, firing the machine gun randomly, just to spark terror and fear among the miners and their families.
It would routinely circle the tent colony, spraying machine gun fire over the heads of the colonists, and searchlights were set up in the foothills above the colony, and light would be played on the tent colony at night. Anything to disrupt the daily rhythms of the workers.
They're talking about kind of the lead up to everything. This is before April 20th of 1914, but yeah, I find it interesting. Like I said, this is the same shit that goes on today. The reactionary propensity for projection. The people on the side of the mine owners keep disparaging the striking mine workers as kind of like this criminal element, this rabble, these ne'er-do-wells out there just causing trouble, and they're a menace to society. You know, they're violent. They're out there doing these terrible things. And it's the exact opposite. You know, the thugs that they had brought out, the Baldwin Felts guys and the National Guardsmen that were receiving payrolls, they're the rabble. They're the criminals. They're the dangerous ones out there just wantonly driving armored cars through these tent cities, firing machine guns and putting spotlights on them at night, just randomly shooting at people. It's classic projection. Whereas these cities are formed and they're making their best faith effort to be run completely democratically and to kind of be a model for the towns around them, to look at them and see like, oh, these are good people and these are us, and this is what we should aspire to, and we should hopefully help them, you know, support their endeavors towards getting better work conditions for everybody.
Before long, there's a running gun battle going on with the strikers fleeing for their lives.
Almost immediately, it turned into a full-scale battle. The miners grabbed their rifles and hid along an arroyo, trying to draw the National Guard away from their families at the Ludlow tent colony. The National Guardsmen mounted a machine gun on top of a nearby hill and sprayed the miners in the camp somewhat randomly with machine gun fire.
One of the most important moments in the violence is when a train passes by. They're shooting each other from different sides of the railroad track. And so when a train passes by, it provides cover for people to escape.
The militiamen, qua mercenary soldiers, moved into the colony, set tents aflame.
Some 10 miners were killed, as well as one National Guardsman.
I'm not sure that they were intending to kill people. I think they just wanted to
disperse the... Yeah, so in the battle, there was, in the actual fighting, there was, I'll just read this. Many miners' families had dug small cellars under their tents. These cellars were used to store food items and for women and children to hide should shooting break out. These people lived in cloth tents. When the National Guard opened up, unless you could run, these were the only places you could hide. About 10 miners and 1 guardsman were killed in the shooting, along with 11 children and 2 women caught in the cellar beneath a burning tent. So this was the photo that you had found earlier. This, I think it says something like, this was the cellar that the bodies of 11 burnt children and 2 women were found in.
Yeah.
For the next 10 days, the miners were incensed by the violence that the coal companies and National Guard brought against them. The miners began armed attacks on coal companies, National Guard, and scabs across the region. At one point, the miners even hijacked an armored train. These people had been beaten, abused, left out in the cold winter, homeless, and now murdered along with their families. The small group of miners that escaped to the mountains again organized and launched a campaign of guerrilla warfare. State National Guard were driven out of the region, scabs were ran out, mines were either destroyed or taken over by the disaffected miners and ran as collectives. It was at this time that President Woodrow Wilson called in the U.S. Army and the violence was quelled. The strike was broken and the mines were returned to the owners. For the next year, the recorded minutes from the UMWA meetings would show that no one would show up and no business was conducted. Private business, along with the power of the federal government, had broken them. However, the slogan of "Remember Ludlow" became a rallying cry for labor organizing across the country, radicalizing and strengthening the resolve of activists, and in time, the mine workers would gain a voice.
And in a little more time, nobody would remember. They'll be gone to history.